The lawnmower's engine roared to life, rattling in the thick summer heat. The girl gripped the handle tightly, her small hands barely able to steady the heavy machine. The grass was high, wild, and unkempt, just like the dozens of other yards she had tackled that week. Sweat trickled down her forehead, her arms ached, but she pushed forward. She had to. A car rolled past on the street, slowing slightly as the driver glanced out the window. A girl, no older than 13, working alone under the blazing sun, covered in dirt and grass clippings. It was an unusual sight. Most kids her age were at the pool, playing with friends, or scrolling through their phones in air-conditioned homes. But she was out here, pushing an old lawnmower from one house to the next. An elderly man watering his flowers across the street watched for a moment before stepping closer. "Sweetheart, why are you working so hard?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. The girl stopped, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. She hesitated, but something in the man's kind eyes made her answer. "I have to," she said quietly. "My mom needs chemo, and we can't afford it." The words hung in the air. The man's watering can tipped slightly in his hand, but he said nothing. His face softened, his throat tightened. She didn't wait for a response. She pulled the mower's cord again, and the engine sputtered back to life. And then, something happened that she never expected. A camera shutter clicked. Someone had taken a photo. And within days, the entire world would be talking about her. The girl barely noticed the sound of the camera clicking. She was too focused on finishing the yard before the sun dipped behind the trees. It was already late afternoon, and she had 2 more houses to go before heading home. She emptied the grass catcher, wiped her forehead, and moved to the next lawn. But the elderly man across the street didn't move. He stood frozen, watching her. His heart ached at the sight. A child shouldn't have to carry such a burden. He wanted to say something more, to offer help, but before he could speak, she was already pushing her mower toward another house. As she worked, her mind drifted back to her mother. The house wasn't far, just a few blocks away. Inside, her mother lay on the couch, exhausted from another long day of fighting. The cancer had taken its toll. Her once lively eyes were tired, her body weak. The medical bills stacked on the kitchen table were a constant reminder that time was running out. The girl had tried everything. She had asked neighbors if they needed errands run. She had collected bottles and cans for recycling. She had even set up a small lemonade stand last summer. But nothing brought in enough money. And then, one evening, as she sat beside her mother, she heard her whisper, "I don't want you worrying about me, sweetheart." But how could she not? That night, she grabbed her uncle's old lawnmower from the garage. If no one else could help, she would do it herself. At first, she had no customers. People didn't trust a kid with yard work. Some even laughed at her. "You? Mow my lawn?" one man had scoffed. "You'll break my mower before you finish half the yard." But she didn't back down. She mowed her own front yard, then the neighbors, proving she could do the job. Soon, word spread, and slowly, houses began hiring her. Still, the work was brutal. Some yards were filled with overgrown weeds that made her hands itch. Others had thick patches of grass that took twice as long to cut. Some homeowners underpaid her, handing her a few crumpled bills, barely enough for a meal. But she never complained. Every dollar went into a small tin box under her bed, the chemo fund. That night, as she walked home, she counted her earnings. It wasn't much, but it was something. As she approached her house, she saw the porch light on. Her mother was waiting for her, concern etched on her face. "You're late," her mother said softly. The girl shrugged. "Had to finish one more yard." Her mother sighed, reaching out to push a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "You shouldn't have to do this." The girl forced a smile. "I don't mind." Her mother didn't believe her. But she didn't argue. Inside, the tin box sat on the nightstand. The girl lifted the lid and dropped in the cash. The pile was growing, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She lay down in bed, exhausted, staring at the ceiling. She had no idea that, at that very moment, her picture was being shared online. And her life was about to change forever. The next morning, the girl woke up before the sun had fully risen. Her arms were sore, her legs ached, but she didn't have time to rest. She had another full day of mowing ahead of her. She quietly got dressed, careful not to wake her mother, then grabbed a quick bite of bread before slipping out the door. The tin box under her bed had some money, but not enough. Every dollar counted, and she wasn't going to waste a single moment. As she walked down the street, she noticed something strange. People were looking at her. A few whispered to one another. A woman sitting on her porch pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. The girl felt a prickle of unease, but kept walking, pushing her mower along the sidewalk. Then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She rarely got messages, only her mother or a couple of neighbors ever texted her. Pulling it out, she saw a message from a classmate she hadn't spoken to in months. "Is this you? You're all over the internet." She frowned. The internet? She tapped on the link, and her heart nearly stopped. There she was, mid-step, pushing the lawnmower, her face determined, sweat clinging to her forehead. It was the photo from yesterday, the one taken by the man across the street. Someone had shared it on social media, and now it had thousands of likes, comments, and shares. She scrolled through the messages. "This girl is amazing. We need more kids like her. Why is a child doing this? Where's the government? Where's the community? Does anyone know how we can help?" The girl swallowed hard. She had never been noticed like this before. She had always been the quiet one in class, the one who sat in the back, blending into the background. Now, the whole world seemed to be looking at her. And then, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and she rarely got calls. But something told her to pick up. "Hello," she said hesitantly. "Hi, sweetheart." The voice on the other end was warm, kind. "My name is Donna. I work for a local news station. We saw your story online, and we'd love to feature you." The girl's breath caught in her throat. "Feature me?" "Yes," Donna said. "People are really moved by what you're doing. We want to share your story with the world." The girl hesitated. She didn't like attention. She didn't want pity. But then she thought of her mother, the chemo treatments, and the tin box under her bed that was still far from full. Maybe this could help. "Okay," she whispered. "Wonderful," Donna said. "We'll be at your house this afternoon." When the call ended, the girl stood frozen on the sidewalk, her heart pounding. This was real. This was happening. She took a deep breath and pushed forward. She had lawns to mow. But she had no idea that, at that very moment, her story was reaching someone she never could have imagined. Someone who would change everything. The girl spent the rest of the morning mowing lawns as usual, but something felt different. People were watching her. A few even stopped to hand her money without asking for their grass to be cut. Others simply smiled and gave her words of encouragement. "You're an inspiration, sweetheart," an older woman said, pressing a $20 bill into her hand. The girl didn't know how to respond. She muttered a quiet "thank you" and quickly moved on to the next yard. By midday, she was exhausted but rushed home, her heart pounding. The news crew was coming, and she had no idea what to expect. When she stepped inside, her mother was sitting on the couch, looking weaker than ever. "Mom," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." Her mother gave a tired smile. "What is it, honey?" The girl hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed her the post. Her mother's eyes widened as she scrolled through the comments. "Oh my," she whispered. "Is this real?" Before the girl could answer, there was a knock at the door. Her stomach clenched. She opened it to find a woman standing there, with a cameraman behind her. Donna, the reporter, smiled warmly. "Hello, sweetheart," she said. "Are you ready?" The girl glanced back at her mother, who nodded, despite her obvious fatigue. Taking a deep breath, she stepped outside. The interview started with simple questions. "How long have you been mowing lawns?" "A few months," the girl answered. "Why did you start?" She hesitated, but then, looking at the camera, she told the truth. "My mom's sick. I wanted to help." Donna's eyes softened. "That's incredibly brave of you. And what do you plan to do with the money?" "Pay for her chemo," the girl said simply. There was a moment of silence. Even the cameraman seemed to be holding his breath. Then Donna smiled. "You're an amazing young lady. And I think a lot of people are going to want to help." The interview ended, and the news crew packed up, but the girl's story had only just begun. That night, when the segment aired, something incredible happened. Donations started pouring in. Strangers from all over the country began sending money, wanting to help. Some donated $5, others gave hundreds. A local business even reached out, offering to cover a portion of the medical bills. The girl was overwhelmed. She never expected this. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Because somewhere, in a quiet home in California, a legendary actor was watching her story unfold on the news. And he wasn't just watching. He was about to step in. The next morning, the girl woke up to the sound of her mother's phone buzzing nonstop. It had been like this all night: notifications, messages, and calls from people who had seen the news story. Donations were coming in from strangers who wanted to help, and the tin box under her bed was now replaced by an online fundraiser that was growing by the hour. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. As she rubbed the sleep from her eyes, her mother's voice called out weakly from the other room. "Honey, come here, you won't believe this." The girl hurried to the living room, where her mother was holding the phone with trembling hands. "Who is it?" she asked, her stomach twisting with nerves. Her mother swallowed hard, then whispered the name. "Clint Eastwood." The girl froze. The Clint Eastwood? The legendary actor and director? That couldn't be right. Her mother nodded, eyes wide with disbelief. "He saw your story. He wants to talk to you." The girl's hands were shaking as she took the phone. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm, steady, and unmistakable. "Hey there, kid," Clint Eastwood said. "I saw what you've been doing for your mom. That's real courage. Real strength." The girl felt her breath catch. She had watched his movies with her mom, had seen him play heroes on the screen. And now, he was talking to her. I just wanted to help," she stammered. "You've done more than that," Clint said. "You inspired a lot of people, including me." He paused. "Now, listen, I don't want you to worry about your mother's treatment anymore. I'm covering the rest of the cost." The room seemed to spin. Her mother gasped. "What?" Clint chuckled softly. "I've been blessed with a lot in my life, and I believe in paying it forward. Consider it taken care of." Tears filled the girl's eyes. She had spent so many sleepless nights worrying about money, working until her hands were blistered, feeling like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. And now, just like that, it was lifted. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "No need to say anything," Clint replied. "Just take care of your mom." "And kid?" "Yes? You're the kind of hero movies should be made about." The call ended, and for a long moment, the girl and her mother just sat there in stunned silence. Then, the girl did something she hadn't done in months. She collapsed into her mother's arms and cried, not from exhaustion, not from fear, but from overwhelming relief. Outside, the sun was rising, casting golden light over the quiet street. For the first time in a long time, the girl felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The news of Clint Eastwood's generosity spread like wildfire. It wasn't just the girl and her mother who were in disbelief, the entire town was buzzing. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers from nearby towns showed up at their doorstep, not to gawk, but to help. Some brought food, others handed over envelopes with donations, and a few even offered to mow lawns in the girl's place so she could finally take a break. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone in her fight. The girl still went out to mow a few lawns, not because she needed the money anymore, but because it felt right. It was part of her. It was how she had started this journey. But this time, as she pushed the heavy mower through the grass, something was different. People didn't just watch from their windows, they came outside. Some stood on their porches, clapping and cheering her on. Others waved signs with messages like, "Stay strong," and "We believe in you." At one house, an elderly man approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You remind me of my granddaughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have been your age." He reached into his pocket and pressed a crumpled $20 bill into her palm. "Take this, sweetheart. Not because you need it, but because I want to be part of what you're doing." The girl swallowed the lump in her throat. She had never expected any of this. Later that evening, she and her mother sat in the living room, surrounded by stacks of letters, gifts, and donations. The online fundraiser had surpassed every expectation. People from all over the country, and even some from overseas, had chipped in. The amount was far beyond what they needed for chemo. Her mother smiled weakly. "What do we do with the rest?" The girl didn't even have to think. "We help others." She spent the next few days reaching out to local families who were struggling with medical expenses. She spoke to hospitals and clinics, asking if there were patients in need. And then, without warning, something even more unbelievable happened. One evening, as they sat together, the doorbell rang. The girl opened it to find a man standing there, holding an envelope. "I was sent here by Mr. Eastwood," he said with a warm smile. "He wanted to make sure you got this." The girl hesitantly took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "You did something incredible. You reminded the world that kindness still exists. I wanted to give you something in return, not just for your mom, but for your future. Use this wisely. Make a difference." Attached to the letter was a check. The girl's hand shook as she read the amount. It wasn't just enough to cover medical bills. It was enough for college. For a fresh start. For a whole new life. Tears filled her eyes as she turned to her mother. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. Her mother pulled her into a tight embrace. For the first time in forever, they could finally breathe. The days that followed felt like a dream. The weight that had once sat so heavily on the girl's shoulders was now gone. Her mother's treatments were fully covered, the community had rallied behind them, and thanks to Clint Eastwood's generosity, she had the chance at a future she had never dared to imagine. But instead of slowing down, the girl felt a fire inside her. She knew what it was like to struggle, to feel helpless, to fight against the odds. And she wasn't about to forget that. One morning, as she sat beside her mother in the hospital, she opened the letter from Clint Eastwood again. The words felt even more powerful now. "Use this wisely. Make a difference." She had already started helping local families pay for treatments, but she wanted to do more. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Then, she picked up a pen and started writing. A plan. A foundation to help kids and families who couldn't afford medical treatment. Not just in her town, but beyond. She used part of the money to set up a fund, reaching out to local hospitals and charities to find families who needed help the most. Donations were still coming in, and the story had gained national attention. Businesses, organizations, and even other celebrities reached out, wanting to contribute. Before she knew it, something incredible had happened. Her story, which had started with a simple lawnmower and a desperate hope to save her mother, had turned into something much bigger. A movement. One afternoon, her mother, now stronger from her treatments, watched as the girl stood in front of a group of reporters, speaking about the foundation. "I never thought mowing lawns would lead to this," she said with a small smile. But I think the real lesson is that you don't need to be rich or powerful to change the world. You just need to care enough to try. The cameras flashed, and she could hear the murmurs of the crowd. She wasn't just a struggling girl anymore. She was a symbol of resilience, of kindness, of never giving up. After the press conference, her mother pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You didn't just save me. You saved so many others." Tears welled in the girl's eyes, but this time, they weren't from fear or exhaustion. They were from gratitude. She had started this journey alone, pushing a heavy lawnmower under the scorching sun, wondering if anyone would care. Now, she had a whole world standing beside her. And as she looked up at the sky, she thought of Clint Eastwood's words once more. "You're the kind of hero movies should be made about." Maybe one day, someone would tell her story. But for now, she was too busy living it. Months passed, and life slowly transformed into something the girl had never thought possible. Her mother's health was improving, the weight of medical bills was no longer crushing them, and the foundation she had started was already helping families in need. But something even bigger was happening, something she never saw coming. One afternoon, as she finished mowing a lawn for an elderly woman who had insisted on paying her despite knowing she no longer needed the money, she received a phone call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but full of warmth. "Is this the young lady who started the foundation?" "Yes," she said hesitantly. The man chuckled. "Good. My name is Daniel. I work in film production. I think you're about to be very surprised." She listened as he explained that Clint Eastwood had been so moved by her story that he had shared it with his connections in the film industry. There were talks of turning her journey into a documentary, maybe even a full-length movie. The girl was speechless. I'm just a normal person," she stammered. "Maybe," Daniel said. "But sometimes, normal people do extraordinary things. That's the kind of story the world needs." The call ended, but the words lingered in her mind. That evening, she sat at the dinner table with her mother, who looked healthier than she had in years. They ate together, laughing and talking about things that had nothing to do with sickness, bills, or stress, just normal mother-daughter things. For the first time in a long time, life felt whole again. Then, the doorbell rang. When she opened it, she was stunned to see a small group of people standing outside, some holding cameras, others carrying notebooks. One woman stepped forward. "We're from a major news network," she said. "We'd love to do a special on your story." The girl's breath caught in her throat. "Why me?" she asked, still struggling to understand why so many people cared. The reporter smiled. "Because you represent something people need right now. Hope." The interview aired a few weeks later, and the response was overwhelming. Donations to the foundation skyrocketed, and families from all over the country sent messages of thanks. But the most unexpected moment came when she received a personal letter from Clint Eastwood himself. "I knew when I met you that you were special. You reminded me of something I've learned over the years: real heroes aren't the ones on the big screen. They're the ones who show up when it matters most. Keep going. The world needs people like you." Tears filled her eyes as she read his words over and over. She had once thought her story was just about survival. About mowing lawns to pay for chemo. About pushing forward when everything felt hopeless. But now, she saw it for what it truly was. A story of kindness. Of resilience. Of proving that one person, even a young girl with nothing but determination and a lawnmower, could change the world. As she stood outside, staring at the endless horizon, she felt a deep sense of peace. This was just the beginning. The end. "Thank you," the letter read. "Thank you for being there when we couldn't be. You gave our son something no one else could. You gave him peace. We will never forget what you did." The words weren't easy for Eastwood to read. The weight of them, the gratitude in them, hit him harder than any role or any accolade ever had. He had done it for the boy, but he realized then that he had also done it for himself. The connection, the moment of pure humanity, it had changed him, too. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. He didn't need to show it to anyone. He didn't need the world's applause. He didn't need any more recognition. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light across the Pacific, Clint Eastwood felt something inside him settle. He had done the right thing. He had kept his word. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, he realized that some legacies are written in small, quiet actions rather than grand gestures. The boy, though gone, had left behind something more powerful than any movie role or fame could ever provide, a reminder that kindness, courage, and love are always worth fighting for. And Clint Eastwood, the man who had once made a name for himself as the tough, unmovable cowboy, had become something much greater, a man who kept his promises, even when the world didn't understand. As he stood up from his chair, the wind lifting the brim of his hat, Clint Eastwood smiled. For in the end, the boy had been right. There were cowboys in heaven. And one of them was still out there, watching over the world, teaching everyone how to live with strength, humility, and love. The end.